Do you consider yourself a disruptive entrepreneur?
That's really interesting. No, I don't. And the reason being is because I've either helped build 4 startups, 3 of which have exited, and 1 of which is about to exit. And they've all, with the exception of 1, exited between a price of between around 10 million sterling and around 80 million sterling. And that is not reflective of a disruptive business. And it was never my intention, certainly in the early days, 10, 20 years ago, to be disruptive. All I wanted to do was start a business, become tactically disruptive against incumbent players, but not strategically disruptive. And I don't have the management skills, I don't think, to become strategically disruptive in that regard. And certainly, if you take a business like Uber with a 70 billion market cap, that is truly disruptive business.
Yes.
But no, that was never my intention to be able to do it. But since then, I think since in the past 10 years, the last business I set up with the idea of trying to reverse engineer Google with using big data. And that's allowed me to actually be in a position to look at other businesses and look at the disruption, within the same time understanding how fast the technology is evolving. So I'm an entrepreneur turned commentator on disruption rather than a disruptive entrepreneur.
So do you look for disruptive businesses to invest in?
No.
No, you're close to that. Totally.
I'm sorry if that wasn't the answer you were looking for. No, again, for the simple reason being is because my choice is B2B businesses in an early stage investment configuration. So post, as our American colleagues would describe it, as being friends and family round, but pre-A, so that the valuation level is quite low. The risk is clearly higher. And like every other investor I know, I've got a basket case on one hand, and I've got a potential unicorn on the other. Everybody likes to think they've got a potential unicorn when they're an investor.
Yes.
But I really intend to invest for businesses that are going to exit in the 50 to 150 million bracket, because I believe there's a sweet spot there.
Yes.
And it's quite interesting, for one of the competitors of my last business that I created, they've been overcapitalized. They've had something in the region of around 40 or 50 million in VC, which if you look at a 10x exit, that's a $400-500 million exit. And there aren't that many people at the top of the pyramid that can do that level of transaction, especially if revenue is not a big part of it and they're buying technology, because that's a very brave board decision to make at that moment in time. So in direct answer to what you're saying is that I tend to actually position my investments in the middle ground.
What are the amounts of your investments?
Anything from as little as 30, 40,000 all the way up to the one that I think might be a unicorn, will probably be, I'll end up 150,000, and then I stop past the A round. So as soon as it gets into a B round, then it's law of diminishing returns for me, so I tend to stop at that moment in time. The great thing we've got, and I restrict myself to UK businesses because we've got a fantastic tax regime for both investors and for entrepreneurs in the UK that get, for investors, up to 40% tax return immediately, and for entrepreneurs get 10% income tax, 10% capital gains tax on exit up to 5 million. So it's a very, very convivial environment here.
But it has to be a UK-based business, right? It cannot be even a France or Belgium-based business.
No, that's right.
As a commentator on disruptive businesses, can you give us an idea of disruptions, not only high technology disruption, but general profitable disruptions? So I look at different food markets and agricultural markets, and what strikes my mind right now is the sweeteners industry. So for a common person, do you think honey would be the next disruptor just on a theoretical basis? So honey, a disruptor of the sweeteners businesses?
So the answer to my immediate answer to that, without knowing anything about that particular sector, is probably not, because I'm going to second guess that it doesn't scale. Whereas a chemical sweetener scales at an optimal level with very little marginal costs. My understanding of the better honeys, which owns the Makula honey, doesn't scale at all. So technically it might end up as being a better product, but it doesn't give the scale that major corporations probably are going to want to look for. However, having said that, it can be a disruptor to the point that, for example, let's just take something like potato chips, crisps, as the Brits would know them. You then take somebody who comes into the marketplace with a much better quality potato chip, like, for example, Kettle did over Walker's, which was the dominant brand here a couple of years ago. And Kettle have slowly been taking market share because the crisp is recognised to be better quality product with better ingredients as a direct result of it. Thus, the scalability becomes in product reputation rather than necessarily technology or actually marketing. And in fact, actually, marketing I don't think is necessarily a good indication of scale, or in fact a driver of scale these days. I think it's the product quality which actually makes the difference, especially in an area where advertising is being so badly disabled by the likes of Apple and Three, who basically regard advertising as clutter and in the wrong way of the user experience.
Can you think of any disruptive businesses in food or agriculture areas right now on the market?
Well, I can give you some examples of not yet, but forthcoming. But let me give you a consumer disruption, which I think was terrific. And if you go on YouTube and you look for a video called The Dollar Shave Company, this guy was FMCG, not food, but it's a classic example. And what he set out to do was turn an FMCG product into a service product, which is the way that our world is going. So he invented this thing, a Dollar Shave Club, where you simply subscribe to men's razors and he sends you razors through the post on a regular basis. And you get 30 days worth of razors. So as a direct result of that, you've got this subscription pricing model, which is super disruptive to somebody like Gillette, because firstly, it disintermediated the retailers in its entirety, and that's part of Gillette's business model. And then secondarily, he's built something like, I understand, a $250 million business. It's probably not profitable because he's growing so fast. And I think profit in those circumstances is a bit of an anathema. In fact, if you're profitable, you're probably not growing fast, in which case you're not a good investment. However, so I think he's done a really good job there. And what he's simply done is he hasn't used technology. He's simply used a disruptive business model to go upset somebody else's business. When you converge the two together, that's when they become truly disruptive, as in the Ubers of this world, because that's combining technology, usability, and an excellent marginal business model, which is very well capitalised.
Wasn't he hit by a lawsuit by large-scale corporations? The profits are gone into lawyers?
Well, it's interesting you say that. He was hit by a lawsuit by Gillette. So Gillette, through that, this is a terrible thing to say to one's own shareholders, is the messaging from that is, well, actually, guys, we can't out-innovate this guy, so we're going to sue him instead, off the back of an age-old patent. I'm not sure that I would be a very happy shareholder if that was the messaging I was going to get. Now, whether or not that was spin in order to bring him to the negotiating table is an entirely different proposition. But you get into a nasty war game there, because his backers, if he's got a $250,000 business already, his backers are probably fairly deep-pocketed, in which case you probably could be looking at a court action for quite some considerable time, and the US courts being aggressive. Then you've got counter-suing going on and so on and so forth. And then, if he feels that he's going to be attacked in that way, he might decide to do something even more disruptive and target Gillette to go with it. I'd say that the patent thing was a zero-sum game.
I see. I have another question for you. You almost started to answer it without me asking it. UK and Ireland are leaders in VC funding, in fundraising for VCs in Europe, and how their approach is different from the rest of Europe. What are they doing differently? In 2014, both UK and Ireland, having a population of about 70 million, raised 22.2 billion, while France, that has 66 million population, raised only 9.3 billion. So what is the difference?
Motivation. I think there's an issue in every single country that each country needs to deal with individually. I mean, the difficulty, I think, for a lot of French startups, which is why there's an awful lot of French people in London. I understand that London is now the 6th largest French city by population. But the difficulty is that their employment law makes it quite difficult. If you do a startup and something goes wrong, is to actually lose the people. And losing is probably the wrong expression. It's a very hard expression. But if you want them to be commonly with a startup, I was in Silicon Valley 2 weeks ago for a week, and you see with startups they flip. To use the known expression over there, and that is you can change your business model with your technology 2 or 3 times during the course of a funding, and you lose people, and you gain people, and you lose people until such a time when it can become successful or it dies entirely. But with countries with strict labour laws where you don't have that flexibility, then it's a really big problem. And maybe the way to fix that is to have the state pick up and actually guarantee the jobs rather than the employee or the startup do that. So I think it can be a little bit restricted from an employment law perspective. I mean, my example here is Ford. Ford have got a 60 billion market cap with 224,000 employees that they need to pay every single month, irrespective of whether or not they've been disrupted by Uber cars or Google driver's cars or whatever. Uber pops into the marketplace with a 70 billion recent investment round, 70 billion valuation on an investment round with 4,000 full-time employees. Who do you think is going to win that battle?
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
So a lot of this is the legislation is legacy legislation which hasn't caught up with the speed of advancing technology. Unsurprisingly, because technology is now advancing at an exponential rate.
Now, I wanted to turn your attention across the ocean, where the legislation allows a lot more in the labor market. And do you see any advantages for European startups versus the American startups? Are there any advantages, UK, Ireland, France, Belgium, Poland, over the American startups?
Yes.
What are they?
I think that's pretty quickly easy to understand. The US marketplace is homogenized. I mean, there are local state taxes and stuff like that to be able to deal with, but they all pretty much speak the same language. They're all pretty much on the same level playing field as far as the internet is concerned. And therefore, as a startup, one automatically has access to 250 million people marketplace, which is sometimes a little bit too large. Whereas you took a country in Europe, let's say, for example, the UK with a 60-odd million population, that's much easier to reach than a 250 million population. And it's much easier to put some controlled scalability until one goes truly international. I mean, you took a country like Luxembourg. Luxembourg is the ideal place for a US business to come into Europe because it's very tight, very small, commonality of language, so you can start to test your markets there. But the reason why that doesn't happen very often is because 250 million homogenized marketplace is enormous. And for a lot of these startups, all they're doing is simply proving scalability so they get bought out for billions of dollars.
Well, and the question I cannot resist not asking you about Brexit. The referendum is almost around the corner, and if England votes to say no to Europe, what will happen with the general European VC market, startup market? Would it change? And what would happen if it says yes to staying in Europe?
There's a lot of debate. Clearly, there's a lot of debate. I'm a profound capitalist, a liberal capitalist, I think it would be fair to say. Mm-hmm. My attitude to this, my analogy is this, is that, look, Europe is 49% of the UK's trade. So let's say that you're my customer. I walk up to you in the street, I slap you in the face and walk on as if nothing's happened, and you're my largest customer. And if we, the Brits, think that we're just going to do that and we're going to get ignored, we are commercially naive beyond belief. I think it's entirely, my personal view, this is entirely the wrong thing to do. I think it puts us into our island mentality at the point that we need to become globalized from a commercial methodology in order to actually make sure that our economies are going to be stable going forward in a period in the next 10 years of enormous disruption. And the Brexit people are just saying, well, actually, we want to retreat to go back to being Little Britain all over again. So I'm afraid to say that I am profoundly European. I think there are bits that need to be fixed, but nevertheless, I do fundamentally believe in the single market.